I speak to you from the dark depths of the noumenal realm, the unforeseen unseeable, the unknown, or worse, the entirely indifferent. That to which we have no access, said the old cunt, this intergalactic cosmonaut, who bestowed upon us the moral law and the cosmos within him, in which he trapped us, perhaps forever. We have now traversed through all the great thinkers that were born after and with Kant in our German Idealism course, and it is my great and distinct honor that I can present you with the talks of the participants.
Thank you very much. So yeah, we're going to start off weird, I think, which is definitely my lane for this sort of stuff. It's been really great to sort of return to German idealism outside of the university context. I feel like it neuters a lot of what they were getting at essentially. So I'm kind of reading from something. Okay. So yeah, thank you very much. So I just want to talk about how essentially I feel like I need to spend more time coming back to these thinkers. The a priori for me is it's a very kind of psychedelic thought, I think. It's a really good way of sort of getting out of yourself. So I think that, finally escaping from, empirical materialism for me, it's been analogous to a psychedelic experience, there's a possibility we might not simply be billiard balls of existence reducible to the action of mere natural law. The only purpose of which it seems is to just be observed as opposed to having any transcendental value. Observation seems to be a castigation to me. Liberation in regards to the immediate intellect without depending on our unique capacity for it. This is how German idealism diverges for me, I think. So I'm just going to read from my post today about this. The first critique melts into the tongue as the a priori is comprehended. The head starts spinning as the universe is reset to its ideal point. Time and space extend themselves into consciousness as water extends to irrigate life. The canals of the mind spark with electricity in an optimistic enlightenment. I sink into my sheets as time extends before me. Different times are not simultaneous, but successive, just as different spaces are not successive, but simultaneous. An afternoon with the sun in unforeseen hues, in an evening which refuses to set. Kantian pupils grow ever more dilated. Schelling proclaims his indecipherable key to freedom, and Hödeling has to be physically gripped by Hegel as he's convinced he can fly. The Trinity of Tübingen, or a triad of cosmonauts. Along with the transcendental intoxicant, the ego also dissolves. That which merely accompanies all representations is made as immodest as it should be. The ego, the mere sight of empirical apes clutching for transcendental straws. Kant is horrifying. The critique brings an odd detached bliss, retribution, and horror. Virtually all subsequent Western philosophy. How can you possibly be a more badass philosopher than having that on your Wikipedia article? Seriously. Thanks for all the virtually subsequent sleepless nights that I felt because of that. Thank you, Kant. How can anything be ideal when we lose so much in translation? I feel like for the Germans is specifically true. Or perhaps that's the point of philosophy, to lose these aspects in translation. I'm of the opinion that Immanuel Kant wasn't a human being. Only, he's an intellect of intergalactic imagination. And that's the only sort of intellect that has the possibility of penning the first critique. And that should be the point of philosophy, basically. And this is the converse opinion now. Schrecklich, the English sensationalist breathes his first breath of the day, drives clinging to his chin, last night's clothes still on his back. Ach so, ich verstände. Transcendental Miserableism. This is the Anglo-American business model. Perhaps we could have learned something from these Leute. All that matters is the here and now. Just smile and think of England. This brings me to my most controversial opinion. German idealism is just a rebranding of the original Euro-intoxication martyr worship, which is Christianity. This is not in the sense that the ideal is the same, but in the respect that it reaches beyond, so the transcendental, in order to justify its own sensational fallibilities. Du kannst den Tod nicht betrügen. You cannot cheat death. That is the refutation of this miserable German idealist religion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe that's why Kant speaks of aliens indirectly. He's an intergalactic intellect. That's very good. Cheers, Samuel. Thank you. Melanie.
I'm just doing a small piece on Kant and really why I'd like to keep the idea of the noumenal. I start with a quote from Samuel Beckett. Writing is not about something, it is that something itself. A piece of writing, philosophical or poetical, or a work of fine art can say something philosophical when it provokes original thinking. This is attained when we follow what Immanuel Kant calls the guiding thread of inner experience, which he labels soul at section 48 in the Critique of Judgment. He explains that soul, Geist, is an aesthetical sense, signifies the animating principle in the mind, but that whereby this principle animates the psychic substance, the material which it employs for that purpose is that which sets the mental powers into a swing that is final, i.e. into a play which is self-maintaining and which strengthens those powers for such activity. In my subjective experience, I often feel called by a particular piece of writing or art, and this involves what I think is a process of attunement or conversing with certain works. Although the philosophers of the Enlightenment held that truth would lead mankind out of ignorance, thinking that science and classification could lead to a perfection of truth. In his third critique, the Critique of Judgment, 1790, Kant gives a significant freedom back to humans. It is in this writing that Kant's complex and intertwining architectonic system postulates the inherent notion of movement and a coherent unity within its structure due to the mediating concept of judgment. Judgment unifies cognition between our other two conceptual faculties, reason and understanding. Humans are, for the most part, comfortable with what Kant calls determinate judgment, which tends to dominate in everyday cognition as it subsumes a particular under a concept that is already given. There are, however, occasional moments in life when we are given an experience or an object that determinate judgment has no prior knowledge or understanding of. Here, reflective judgment, responding only to the unexpected instance of a singular event, or we may say a revelation which does not coincide with any current ideology or theory, is called upon to intervene in the creation of a possible meaning. Thus, reflective judgment allows Kant to sustain a consistency of philosophy about experiences outside of the understanding. We do not need to actually cognize anything. Kant's system moves to incorporate a subjective freedom that is undetermined by reason. The possibility of a judgment, quote from Kant, merely from one's own feeling of pleasure in an object, independent of its concept, judges this pleasure as attached to the representation of the same object in every other subject, and does so a priori, i.e. without having to wait for the assent of others. This shakes the universality of the mechanical formulation of pure reason in his first critique. Kant tells us to dare to be wise by thinking for ourselves. This daring gives us confidence to explore our own conversation with the works of others that we are intensely engaging with, into a play of mental powers, which Kant describes as self-maintaining and which strengthens those powers for such activity. So it's only through doing and engaging that that we're able to get better at. Philosophy is tasked with keeping a space of inquiry and contemplation open while encouraging others to do likewise. Frederick Schelling, in his Lessons on the Academic Method, promotes an artistic drive in the philosopher as it allows for chance through thinking. Thinking is not productive of anything in and of itself, but serves to intrude and disrupt the universals in favor of a singular subjective experience. This allows for our human freedom beyond the confines of the phenomenal, and indeed, it is only when we allow for the free play of chance of thinking outside the regular determinations of judgment that we can keep philosophy alive. When I engage intensely with a work of philosophy, poetry, or fine art, it is an experience of being that consists in the ecstasy of thinking beyond what is immediately represented in the work. Thinking both the seen and unseen simultaneously stimulates my subjective conversation with particular writings or works of art. I refer to this engagement as conversations because certain works are that something itself, as Beckett stated. Also, I find it highly impressive how the understanding expands to create new concepts on the demand of both free will and the determinations of nature through a somewhat intensive conversation of what has been previously seen and known, and the unseen and unknown. Indeed, it is only when I want or need to communicate this experience of thinking that I must revert back to the universalities of reason through a very different conversation. When writing poetry or art is about something, it has a shared universality. It is easily recreated and satisfies regulative ideals and determinate judgment. However, in subjective experiences of being, there is no meaning until it is given by the individual experiencing, engaging, or conversing with that something itself. Returning to the Beckett quote, writing is not about something, it is that something itself. When we appreciate that something itself, we keep the magic and ecstasy of thinking and philosophy alive. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, clapping. Real clapping, not these weird fake emoji clappings. Ah, we will at some point, I promise, meet in actuality of our bodily immediacies. Who knows, maybe even this year, if anyone can come, make it to London. Thank you very much, Melanie. It's excellent. Is this one of the pieces you've published, or is this spun out from what you've posted?
Yeah, a bit of both. It's not published.
Yeah. Good. I think maybe we should think about maybe just posting this on the forum, and then maybe also getting some of them out. We did that last year a couple of times. Maybe again for some this year. So we'll figure that one out. Thank you. Excellent. So I actually have to look up. James, Mr. Do you know what the title is of James's talk? German is basically German idealism and German engineering. Could you maybe compare that with English engineering and empiricism? That would be just brilliant. And maybe in the second paper. Okay, James, go ahead.
Okay, thanks everyone. So my short paper tonight is entitled Kant and the Art of BMW Maintenance, from German Idealism to German Engineering. It shouldn't be more than a few minutes long. So today, when we think of modern Germany, we may find that images of high quality engineering come to mind. Beautiful high performance vehicles such as BMW and Mercedes-Benz, or exquisitely machined hand tools like Bosch or Stihl. This seemingly highly instrumental turn of events, however, seems at odds with the vision of the 18th century German idealists, who exalted poetry, art, philosophy, and the life of the mind. Drawing on Peter Watson's The German Genius, this short paper will argue that far from representing the abandonment of their ideals, the careful and artisanal craftwork of today's German engineering instead reveals the Aufheben, the preservation of the artistic ideals of Kant, Hölderlin, Schelling, and the other German idealists into the modern age. This thread begins with Kant's attempts to reveal the categories of understanding in his critique of pure reason, which were to eventually inspire the development of Wissenschaft ideology associated with Wilhelm von Humboldt's University of Berlin. According to Schelling, Wissenschaft, quote, is the philosophical insight that there is unity between the real and the ideal, end quote. Wissenschaft then became fused with the concept of Bildung, the inner striving towards becoming more perfect. Just as Kant tried to categorize human understanding, through the application of Wissenschaft ideology in pursuit of Bildung in Humboldt's University, we begin to see the emergence of an ever more perfect classification of research terms and categories. Years later, this precise categorization, as expressed in the pages of the influential journal Annalen der Physik, then leads into the explosion of German physics through the work of Hermann von Helmholtz and Rudolf Clausius, with their respective theories of the conservation of energy and entropy, which then leads into metallurgy and chemistry, which would then give rise to Carl Benz and Rudolf Diesel's engines, and ultimately the birth of the modern automobile industry. But didn't all modern nations go through a similar process of industrialization? What maps out the German experience is any different? And how can the instrumentality of mechanics possibly relate to German idealism? Perhaps an answer can be found in the aforementioned Bildung, that inner striving towards perfection. One flowering of this striving towards perfection could be the fusing of teleology and aesthetics, as Kant sets out in the Critique of Judgment. For example, following Kant, the Romantic Naturphilosophen attempted to categorize animals and creatures according to their telos, their purpose in nature, but they would also draw and illustrate them beautifully in motion. In this same way, the fusing of the teleological and the aesthetic in tools and vehicles that are beautiful because they are so functional is an Aufheben that preserves something of the thinking of German idealism in manufactured objects. In this way, perhaps by standing Kant on his head, as Marx might say, we see the German idealism of the 18th century preserved in the German engineering of the 21st. The end.
Thank you. And we have to congratulate you also, Dr. Simpkin.
Thank you very much.
You've passed your Viva.
Yep.
Excellent. So it's Dr. Simpkin from now on. Finally, I can legitimately call you that. Very well done. Very good paper too. Maybe, you know, it would merit, I think, a bit even longer, but we'll figure that one out. A bit more in depth. You've then, you know, with becoming a doctor, you've fulfilled your inner striving towards perfection. Is there anything that's next, or have you just given up now? Is there?
No, I'm hoping to get it published as a book.
Yeah.
Next step.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good luck. That's what you need, literally. Thank you, James. Very good. Lennart, Herr Oberlies.
Yes.
In Weimar.
No, actually, I'm in Munich today.
Oh.
But yeah. So okay. I'm sending from Munich, and I don't have like a really title. It's more like it's 2.5 pages, and it's more of an indication like where I am with my questioning and what my question is. But it's like about the notion or like the concept of Anschauung. So yeah, I would just start and set a timer. So okay, all empirical thinking aims at the knowledge of its object, thus at experience of it, or in regard to it, alluding to Greek empiria. Philosophy has its object as well. This is, for example, being or truth, and truth. To get to know them in their specificity, to get familiar with the language, speaking to them, out of them, bringing them into comprehension in the innermost right and downmost intelligible ground is reached for repeatedly. One could make the claim that experience, and there is like the inner relation to the notion of experiment, is the highest epistemic form of object knowledge. But what are specificities of empirical cognition distinguishing it from mere perception? How does a material of sensation become experience? Now, let's make a step back. If we were to segregate, divide, and sort out our very own bearing to this world, ply by ply, as it were, with every seam which comes with every re-entry to itself, solemnly seamless to us as this, our furnishing, facilitating an establishment of it by our way of being, allowing us to have a world in which things appears in the first place. So if we want to talk about this, how it is that we encounter objects, things, allegedly a perspective someone like Latour, who Latour will criticize for talking about an object, would be nothing besides a temporal slice in the plane of entanglements, network of networks. We could go from, and now Goosefoot's naive realist metaphysics, all earth, to the principle of the unity of thought and being, on a ladder thereon to empiricist skepticism as the methodological suspicion to this alleged unity. Then further to transcendental empiricism, arguing for the inaccessibility of the thing in themselves, rather providing the schematization to make the object appear not as simple externalities. To direct intuitive knowing of the absolute, which, in avoidance of giving in and giving traction to the myth of the given, recollect and remembers dialectical thinking, leading on to speculative thought. Note how direct, immediate access is hereby recurrently overturned, and how beforehand to the engaging with the absolute, representational thought is eager to please and lead out of a dissection of perception and thought. Kant makes it clear that Anschauungen, normally or commonly translated as intuitions, perhaps better translated, I don't know yet, has sensual sides, views, cannot be mere products of receptivity. In the Critique of Pure Reason, he writes, the same function that gives unity to the various representations in a judgment also gives unity to the mere synthesis of various representations in an Anschauung, which generally speaking is called the pure concept of understanding. Reine Verstandesbegriffe oder reiner Verstandesbegriff. This statement makes it clear that Anschauung cannot be exclusively products of a purely receptive faculty. Without an essential spontaneous power of synthesis of the understanding, we would have no Anschauung at all. Instead, Anschauungen are themselves already thoroughly conceptual. This is exactly something I always struggled with to understand. Now, synthesis is the action of adding different representations to each other and to comprehend their multiplicity in one cognition, one act of cognizing. The concept of synthesis is hence that of uniting or taking together different representations, a given manifold, in a conscious cognition. But why is such a synthesis necessary at all? Kant assumes that we as cognizing, corporal finite beings are affected by things in themselves in certain ways. The product of this affection are yet completely unstructured sense impressions, it seems, which are not consciously accessible to us. In Kant's view, therefore, the function of synthesis is to spontaneously order these sense impressions in such a way that this manifold is epistemically accessible to us, and so at all. It would otherwise presumably be possible to have impressions shaped in this way as mere sensory events. But what is true for non-synthesized manifold, namely that it would be meaningless to us, nothing to us, less than a dream, is especially true for the completely unconnected sense impressions. Only the connecting act of the synthesis of the manifold thus makes a conscious idea, a whole, out of sense impressions. These conceptions are precisely the central view, or Anschauung, it seems. Now, the coming to speak of the theological judgment that make explicit what is contained in these intuitions of natural ends are necessary. But like the intuitive representations they refer and initially give rise to, they are problematic since we cannot understand how an empirical reality natural ends can exist by themselves. We cannot, in other words, distance ourselves from the concepts of a natural end as a mere heuristic means, since we are forced to synthesize objects in accordance with it and are thus inevitably led to present, darstellen, the concept of objective purposeness in natural objects. The step from heuristic judgment an exercise of our faculty of judgment, to intuitive presentation, an exercise of our faculty of imagination, consequently leads to an antinomy, i.e. an unavoidable illusion, as Kant states in the Critique, forced upon us by natural dialectic. The problem of affection, and I think one could name it like this, it seems stems systematically conditioned by the two basic stems of cognition. According to Kant, in order for cognition to be possible as experience, two conditions must be fulfilled. First, the mind must be affected in its receptive faculty. The product of the affection are Anschauung. But the perception takes place only if the object is given to us. This in turn is possibly, at least for us humans, only by afflicting or affecting the mind in a certain way. Now, the perception as material alone is not sufficient. Secondly, the mind must be added as a form in order to order the material of cognition according to its law. Only through the coming together of receptive sensitivity and spontaneity of understanding is cognition as experience possible. The serious problem, however, how are affectations possible at all? Affection can only be thought of as the affect of a cause. Since causality and dependence as categories of thought have their ground in the mind, they are restricted to the realm of possible objects of experience. The cause of affection, however, lies outside of any possible experience, since it exists in the thing in itself. To the thing in itself, however, the concept of the understanding do not fit any application, so that the affection apparently cannot be thought of as caused. This would have the consequence, however, that Kant's basic assumption of the two stems of cognition would be untenable, since affection could thus not be thought in causal relation to a thing in itself. Transcendental and transcendent are not one and the same, this we know, and principles of pure understanding should only be of empirical, not of transcendental use, i.e. of use that goes beyond the limits of experience. A principle, however, which takes away these limits, even commands its overstepping, must be called transcendent. And I mainly draw here from Martin Bunte, Erkenntnis und Funktion. Now, the end. If the goal and purpose of our cognition is ultimately always the concrete, so that which is going together or which has grown together, and here it becomes tricky, because what the content is, it seems, is the affection-induced materialita, objective representational form, formalita. Here from we speak, the speech can know, and only so from out of the constitution and position of the subject of experience, unfolded in the categorical structure of empirical thought as both the immediate beginning and the mediated or indirect task of a process of recognition. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. I probably will have to hear that another 1,500 times, so I understand how much there is in there. By the way, Lennart has written an entire new course in the forum, writing essays on every single of the study questions, and I would recommend you to read them. Very good. I don't know. It's almost like when you hear these extreme complications of this. If you know, there's one page or actually there's a chapter in Being in Time, Heidegger addresses the Erkenntnisproblem and dissolves it in half a page, basically, by bringing in being in the world, and then later on the Lichtung, the clearing. By the way, I think there's a lot, we're not as many people as last time. I think it was almost 30 last time. There's not that many who present. So if there are any questions, if you have a question now, you can ask a question now. If you have a question later on any of the talks that have been presented so far, feel free to just ask. If there is one immediately right now, feel free. If not, then I think Lew is next. So if you have a question later on, maybe for James, ask James then. So Lew.
Thank you, and very happy to be capping off this great course with all these great talks. So my talk is going to be generally historically oriented. It's on the legacy of German idealism. I'm going to give a very brief sketch of the different avenues that the influence of these thinkers travels. So just keep that in mind, that I guess I'm trying to tell you that German idealism doesn't end with, Hegel's death or even Schelling's death. So First thing I'm going to read is a quote from an article written by Michael Rosen. In a letter to his son Oliver, an airman serving in France, the political theorist L.T. Hobhouse describes an episode that took place in the summer of 1917. Hobhouse first reminds Oliver that 3 years earlier, in the last summer of peace before the war, the two of them had sat together in their garden in Highgate reading Kant. On the particular day he is remembering, however, Hobhouse was there alone, reading someone else. We were well accustomed to the noises of our strange, this is Hobhouse's letter now. We were well accustomed to the noises of our strange new world that summer. Daily, the air, if we still heard anything, as someone said, the thud of guns was heard across the northern sea and the murmur of innumerable planes. But this morning it was soon clear that something more was on foot. Gunfire, at first distant, drew rapidly nearer and soon broke out from the northern heights hard by. The familiar drone of the British aeroplanes was pierced by the whining of the Gothas. High above, machine guns barked in sharp staccato, and distant thuds announced the fall of bombs. Presently, 3 white specks could be seen dimly through the light haze overhead, and we watched their course from the field. The raid was soon over. The 3 specks drifted away towards the east. The gunfire died down. The whining faded away, and below the hill, the great city picked up its dead. The familiar sounds resumed their sway. The small birds chirruped from the shrubs, and the distant murmur of traffic told of a world going steadily on its accustomed course. As I went back to my reading table, my first mood was one of self-satire. Was this a time for theorizing or destroying theories when the world was tumbling about our ears and in massive war? My second thoughts ran otherwise. To each man, the tools and weapons that he can best use. In the bombing of London, I had just witnessed the visible and tangible outcome of a false and wicked doctrine, the foundations of which, as I believe, lay in the book before me. And he had Hegel's philosophy of right sitting in front of him. Now, about the same time as that letter was written, across the front on the German side, there was a scholar named Helmut Falkenfeld, and he was writing to a philosopher named Ludwig Marcuse, no relation to Herbert Marcuse. And Helmut writes from the front in the trenches, mind you, I continue to be all right, Ludwig, even though the battle in which I participated on October 30th nearly deafened my ears with the roar of 24 artillery batteries. Nevertheless, I still believe that the third Kantian antinomy is more important than this whole world war, and that war is to philosophy as sensuality is to reason. I simply do not believe that the events of this material world can, even in the least degree, touch upon our transcendental components, and I will not believe it even if a French shell fragment were to tear into my empirical body. Long live transcendental philosophy. Now, I'm not saying we have to endorse these interpretations of things, but you can see how much passion, how much is at stake in our interpretation of German idealism. Is it the cause of the world war, or even both world wars? Or is it the only thing worth fighting for? So that gives you a taste of just how much people have cared about this. And in fact, famously in his history of Western philosophy, Bertrand Russell kind of made the insinuation that German idealism and German romanticism were indirectly responsible for German politics in the early 20th century. Now, another philosopher around the same time, a little bit earlier actually, R.G. Collingwood, who we're reading in Philip's course, in his autobiography, he says that it is the ignorance of idealism, and it's actually realism that has led to people, taking on fascist propaganda and things like that. So you can see again, idealism is at stake in very important ways. So I'm now going to give a very brief sketch of different avenues that idealism travels. I'm going to stick to the Western world, but you should know that there are tremendous commentators on Hegel in the East and in other parts of the world, especially Japan. I know about. There are many thinkers who take German idealism seriously. So I'm going to speak influence grouped by languages. So French, Italian, Spanish, German, Russian, and English. I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm only going to give a little bit for each one. So in France, around the turn of the 19th century, you have a woman, Madame de Stael, and she writes a book called On Germany. This is the first time that France is introduced to German idealist thought. And France's politics in the 19th century are extremely chaotic. And they have many, many revolutions from 1815, 1830, 1848, 1871. It's really intense. So their intellectual world is very eclectic because of all this chaos. And so the big person after Madame de Stael is a man named Victor Cousin, who actually corresponds directly with Schelling. And he has a massive influence on French philosophy with a kind of what he calls spiritualism, which is a kind of eclectic philosophy blending ancient wisdom, German philosophy, these different things. And that's important because this eclecticism is going to inspire Auguste Comte with positivism. He's going to be tired of this spiritualism. Now in Italy, the greatest 19th century, or some say the greatest 19th century Italian philosopher is a man named Bertrando Spaventa. His mother was actually the aunt to Benedetto Croce, some say the greatest 20th century Italian philosopher. And they're both lectured and discussed Hegel quite a bit, and had tremendous influence in government there and parliament, things like that. Very interesting cases in the Spanish language. There was a philosopher around the time of Schelling. He considered himself a disciple of Schelling. His name was Karl Krause. And for whatever reason, basically through influence, he is seen as on the level with the other German idealists in Spanish-speaking language in the 19th and early 20th century. So that you're taught not only Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, but also this man Krause, who we rarely hear of. And such is his influence that actually when philosophy moved to the New World in Latin America, he was taught to such a degree that he had influence on people like Che Guevara and things like that. It's pretty amazing to think of German idealism. Germany, I won't say much because that's probably the one that people know most about. But I'll just give you a laundry list of the people who attended Schelling's lectures. You had Mikhail Bakunin, the Russian anarchist, Søren Kierkegaard, who I'm sure you all know, Engels, who I'm sure you know, Marx, Alexander von Humboldt, Jakob Burckhardt, Feuerbach, Ranke, Cederholm, the Swedish priest working in Russia. Everybody was interested in Schelling's lectures in late 1830s. Now, I want to end on talking about the English influence because I actually think this is the most forgotten. Through a few thinkers, namely a man named T.H. Green and his students, English philosophy took a very idealistic turn around 1860. And because this was coming to the peak of the British Empire, this idealistic philosophy traveled to the entire Commonwealth. So one of the great chancellors of one of the first Australian universities, a man named Mungo McCullum, tremendously influenced. Camillo from the Halkian Forum, he's let me know that Jan Smuts, a very important South African politician, would carry around the critique of reason everywhere. In Canada, where I am, James Watson wrote the first book on Schelling in English. In 1888, there was only one professor at McGill University, and he took it upon himself to translate Salman Maimond's autobiography, which was not translated again in English until 2019. So his translation stood for a while. In England, you had Coleridge and Carlyle, and then British idealism itself. One of my favorite figures, F.H. Bradley. This goes all the way to Collingwood, who I mentioned we're studying in another course. I'm skipping a lot here just because I realize we're running out of time, but the influence is just massive. And it's amazing to see most philosophies that are popular now or became popular, analytic philosophy, positivism, pragmatism, all of these philosophies, they spawned largely in reaction to the prominence of idealism. Especially when the First World War came about, there was this question, why in English universities are, German philosophy so prominent? This is almost a matter of national security. And in fact, a man named R.B. Haldane, who was one of the first people to translate people like Schopenhauer, he was actually he was forced to resign from English government because they felt he was too sympathetic because he knew German. So The influence is tremendous. I didn't even get to the USA, Uzziah Royce. Emerson is directly like influenced by these people. Be interesting to compare Fichte's lecture on the vocation of the scholar with Emerson's most famous lecture, The American Scholar. Anyway, I appreciate your patience. I just want to end on a final quote from Thomas Carlyle, who really took it upon himself to introduce German philosophy and culture to the English language. And this is from a 1830 essay he wrote called Signs of the Times. He said, if we look deeper at our times, we shall find that this faith in mechanism has now struck its roots deep into men's most intimate primary sources of conviction, and is then sending up over his whole life and activity innumerable stems, fruit-bearing and poison-bearing. The truth is, men have lost their belief in the invisible, and believe and hope and work only in the visible, or to speak it in other words, this is not a religious age. Only the material, the immediately practical, not the divine and spiritual, is important to us. The infinite, absolute character of virtue has passed into a finite conditional one. It is no longer a worship of the beautiful and good, but a calculation of the profitable. Worship, indeed in any sense, is not recognized among us, or is mechanically explained into fear or pain or hope of pleasure. Our true deity is mechanism. It has subdued external nature for us, and we think it will do all other things in the world. We are giants in physical power. In a deeper than metaphorical sense, we are titans that strive by heaping mountain on mountain to conquer heaven also. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I was mute, sorry. Very good. Where's my list? Oh, Tonatiuth. It's going to be a different one. Oh yeah, James, do you have a question?
Yeah, great talk there, Lew. I just wondered, do you see any signs of German idealism or that debate right now in 2021?
Certainly in the Halcyon Forum, they just had a great course on German idealism. No, I mean, that's a whole other story I wouldn't get into. I mean, after the Second World War, Friedrich Beiser calls it the dark ages of German scholarship. So now I think there's like a resurgence in scholarship, but actual people philosophizing and not just, talking about it. I guess that remains to be seen. But thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Tonatiuth, about you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be bringing up some points I made in the last Proseminar on early Greek thinking, and I think that is going to be useful here. This is on the act of forgetting. And on the previous Halcyon course on early Greek thinking, we had our leitmotif, the one and the many, or Henkai Pan from Heraclitus. The recurrent attempts of many thinkers to think through the common harmony of all things. And this time in this course, we have this German idealist trying to do the same, and we get specifically from Schelling the necessity of learning in this process. And from his prerequisites to university studies, we get what it became the motto of our course: learn only in order to create this harmony that the Greeks were thinking about, but also to create harmony between ancient and modern, and also to create harmony between particular and universal. However, in this learning prescription, he points to a particular characteristic of memory and its relationship with learning. In the same paragraph of this university studies, he says, ready-made knowledge can only be memorized. Knowledge is not truly our own until we are capable of reproducing the given content in a form of our own making. Memorizing is but a negative condition. Why does he refer to memory in this matter? What is this ready-made knowledge he talks about? It's something that is copied, not created. Alien, since it's not made our own, and in a way it's a kind of death knowledge. What then has to be done first in order to create? I would argue it's to negate this negative condition. That is to say, the first step is to forget. This does not mean to get rid of memory altogether. Obviously, one does not learn without memory. As simple as if you don't remember a thing of what you just read or heard in a lecture, you're in the same state as you started. Here, the knowledge is neither your own or ready-made or borrowed or however we want to call it. However, in this process of learning, the collection of details is lost. And again, let me use a crude arithmetic example that I inspired from this short story I have mentioned in the last Proseminar, Funes de Memorias by Jorge Luis Borges. Here we have a man who is unable to forget any detail he experienced and explains to Borges that the Arabic numeral system makes no sense to him and begins working on a new system that seems clearer. And his solution to naming numbers is simple. Every single number in existence gets its own names. The numbers have the names of random people, machines, animals, historical figures like Napoleon, chemicals, so on. So when he needed to name a number, he would simply remember it. I imagine that somewhere around the trillions, eventually he would stumble with the number Tonatiuth, the number Johannes, the number Dr. Simpkin, and so on. Under such a system, I mean, not really a system, just a collection, it would be impossible to know the name of the next number. And to perform basic operations such as addition, it would be a work entirely of memory as well. In our everyday system, we don't remember every particular name of every number. However, if we see a string of digits, we can use a few elements that we do have in our memory, such as we know the name of the digits from 0 to 9. We know how to call each number in each position, and we can break apart and extrapolate from there and construct the name. And the same is when we stumble with basic operations. And I mean, alas, there is no number Tonatiuth in this system. As a side note, this is just a very reductive example to illustrate the limits of memory. So do not take it as a proposal to take a few rules of a system and then generalize over everything. So if you start saying things like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, please don't blame me. In this story also, the character tries to make a new language inspired by John Locke, where now not just numbers, but everything should have its particular name. Every particular leaf in a tree and every particular tree. After all, if you memorize everything, what can you say about a leaf? You can have an extensive collection of specific leaves in your memory, but what would they be to say what is a leaf? If they are not the same leaf, furthermore, even a single leaf would not be the same in different points in time. The green and smooth leaf you pick up on Monday would be a brown and crumbly leaf on Friday. To say something remotely intelligible about the leaf would not be thinking about all your individual leaves. You would have to forget them to get what it really is. On a more generalized sense, relying solely on memory, all these elements of the world would be necessarily to be given every single time. That is to say, to have something in your mind, you would have to receive it through experience, like Hume. It would be necessary to accept any irregularity in the world only through habit. You can expect the sun to rise tomorrow because it raised today and yesterday, but you cannot object to the possibility that next time it won't happen, or that next time you will be greeted by a purple sun until you get to that point and see it directly. Since to the use of pure memory, things could only be given and reproduced instead of created, it would conduce to great unfreedom, a mechanistic relation with learning without real production. Schelling writes, only by his divine capacity for production, man is truly man. Here the forgetting is a necessary action in the process to demechanize the act of learning, forcing the learning not to absorb the ready-made knowledge, but to remake it. The task to think it, make it come alive and rearticulate it, still pending in this phase, but now this path is enabled. After a new production we have been achieved, whether being thinking, poetry, art, then the forgetting has to start all over again. This is just the preamble, the necessary condition to a process that it has to be repeated in order to keep this learning as a living thing. Otherwise, if it remains still, it again becomes something to be memorized. A part of this ready-made knowledge and runs the risk of staying with the results as easily packaged propositions, a substitute for thought. In the Fun story, sorry, last time I mentioned it, Borges concludes that thinking is forgetting. This is going too far, but it's more accurate to say that forgetting is the necessary action that makes thinking an active process, what forces you to go through it again and again, working with what is learned, not as rigid blocks to be reassembled, but as Schelling would put it, raw materials to call forth the image of your soul. Thank you.
Excelente. Excellent. Gracias.
Usted.
Yeah, very good. There's a passage somewhere in Being in Time where Heidegger says that once, paraphrasing poorly now, once we have something too readily available in front of our eyes, it's when it becomes almost ingraspable. It's too available. And yeah. Any questions for Tonatiuth, perhaps? Or anyone else who was before? If not, then we continue with Leo Harrington. All right. So Leo, you're next. Professor Harrington, you have to unmute yourself, please. You're mute. Yeah, better.
Oh, wait. What happened, Johannes?
It's fine. Go on.
Is it fine?
Yes.
Okay. It's reversed on my screen. Oh, well.
Okay. Yeah.
Alrighty. So my title of my talk is To True Infinity and Beyond, and time permitting again. And so as a preface, my original intention was actually not even to give anything here, just to kind of indulge in nostalgia, imagining, the old days of giving talks before PowerPoint and computers, where we just wrote stuff on transparencies and used overhead projectors. But I emailed Johannes about it, and kind of waxed too long in the email, and then Johannes kind of outed me by declaring, and Leo Harrington will give a math talk. And so I felt the honor of math was at stake, so I actually designed an actual math talk. So sorry, guys. But here, and by the way, in a math talk, if there's a paper at all, it probably hasn't been written yet, or it doesn't matter. The math talk is just there to kind of liven things up about whatever we're talking about. So we start with true infinity. Let's see. So here's a possible instance of true infinity. So if you look at it, you should either see a profile of a face with a big nose, or a profile of a face with a big mouth and a Kirk Douglas chin. But hopefully you can't see both at once. To focus on one forces the other to go into the background. And that's kind of the something or other. Whatever you're focusing on is the something, and the thing that becomes background is the other. And that's the to infinity. So there's an exclusion principle involved. There's two things, but you can only see one at a time. The other one has to kind of just go away, become hidden. And I think for Hegel, this is very, very close to what Aristotle means by a contradiction. So I wrote it down. For Aristotle, a contradiction is when the same at the same time occurs and doesn't occur in the same and with respect to the same. And of course, it's not quite a contradiction here, because, there's actually two things here, the big mouth and the big nose. And the one's being allowed to show and the other can't, and back and forth. So it's not really one thing, a unity that is literally at the same time showing itself in, in not, showing itself, which would be a contradiction as far as Hegel's concerned in the Hegelian sense. But we're very close, and given Hegel, if you're very close, let's see what happens. So to make it kind of abstract in a Hegelian way that Hegel kind of likes, I'll just forget the pictures of big noses and mouths and just go positive, negative. A plus means it's appearing, it's being shown. Negative means it's in the background, it's hidden, right? And here's a little poem by Piet Hein. He calls his little short, spiffy poems Groks. He's Danish, by the way. So I'll just read it. A bit beyond perception's reach, I sometimes believe I see that life is two locked boxes, each containing the other's key. And that's kind of what happens in true infinity. In order to show something, for one box to actually kind of open and appear and be shown, the key to that is inside that other box, which is totally hidden. So that's one way to kind of, think about true infinity. But now we're kind of focusing on a hidden key behind it. What could that be? And so we move on in good Hegelian fashion. What did I say here? Okay, we actually moved on very speedily in terms of Hegel's motions, usually, because we've now jumped from the first third of the logic, the first half of the objective logic, to the second half of the objective logic and the doctrine of essence. And now, basically, true infinity, with for good reason, is going to be called external reflection, and we've introduced something we call essential reflection. So now we have true infinity and beyond, as the title said. Okay, so the idea is that hidden thing, the key in the background, is what now grounds, is what now posits. The child is positing the adult too, and at least that's what a good Hegelian would definitely want to say. Ground and ground kind of dance back and forth between each other. The key that allows the hidden to be shown is simply passed back and forth between the two. Okay, so we're in the middle of the doctrine of essence, and I just want to talk about the essential relation. In a sense, the essential relation, oh, by the way, I should have said, what you're seeing is basically simply what Hegel's logic looks like. Well, let me say it in terms of what it looks like to at least one mathematician. I'm not sure if there's more than one, but at least one mathematician sees Hegel's logic, at least the doctrine of the objective logic, in this way. The essential relation is kind of a relation between a true infinity, but more a whole bundle of true infinity, because we just saw, that by grounding and so on, one thing, like the child, will manifest in huge bunches of ways. And similarly, so it's a relation between a whole bundle of true infinities, but each component of which is grounding and grounded by another whole bundle of true infinities. And so to make it pictorially convenient for us, I'm going to have the rows be those true infinities, and the diagonals are going to be the grounding. And I'm doing it that way because on the one hand, the text that I'm going to be using, I mentioned it in my abstract, kind of does it that way. And also I think that's how Parmenides does it. So, I might as well go with that. So the rows are going to be the true infinities in the sense of, big nose, big mouth, if you want. The diagonals are going to be, they're also in a way true infinities because there's still the exclusion principle of one thing is hidden as ground or positing, and the other is appearing, is being shown as grounded or posited. And that'll be going along the diagonals. Okay? All right. Any questions? Habit. Where am I? Ah, yes. And here we come to our main text. It's by Robert McCluskey, the book Blueberries for Sal. So Blueberries for Sal is a book that basically takes place mainly on Blueberry Hill on Blueberry. Oh, by the way, I should have counted before the last slide, but let's do it now. We're having two true infinities basically related to each other. Each true infinity has two things: that which is being shown and that which is hidden, and we have one of them relating to another one. So that's 2 plus 2. So we know how many things we're talking about. 2 plus 2. You can do the math. So on Blueberry Hill, the story is one fine day on Blueberry Hill has blueberries. And one fine day, two pairs of mothers and child go to Blueberry Hill to collect blueberries. One is a human mother and a human child. The human child is Sal, and the human mother is called Sal's mother. The other pair is a little bear cub called Little Bear, and that cub's mother called Little Bear's mother. And so those are the four that are now wandering into Blueberry Hill. Each of them, that dichotomy between humans and bears, humans, well, which may or may not have big noses, but bears, as far as humans think of, they've got really scary big mouths if they want to. So the true infinities are the dichotomy between humans and bears. And the essential relation, which is going to be a relation between two true infinities, which are viewed as bundles of true infinities, consists of the mother, Sal's mother, Little Bear's mother, and the child, Little Bear, the bear cub, and Sal herself. And all of them are, as the book progresses, wandering about Blueberry Hill. And to give the plot away, the two kids, the two children, the bear cub and Sal, kind of just wander off and switch places. So, all right, a brief moment while I set up the next bunch. If I had an organ, I would play some music here, but okay, here we go. Can that be seen? Good. So where are we? So as I said, rows are like true infinities, hence external reflections. The diagonals are essential reflections. Both the external reflections have that exclusion principle, and the essential reflections are also, kind of instances of true infinity, and they both of them have exclusion principles. Oh, and I went too fast. I was going to mention something along the way, so I passed the point, but I might as well do it here. We've now actually encountered Hegel and his contradictions. I said we're close to contradictions when we had true infinities, those external reflections. It's just that it's not really, because the two things just fall apart. But if you're dealing with essential reflections, like an actual relationship between a mother and a child, the actual way, in one instance, if you want, that they are actually connected, that's the unity, at least for Hegel, and in math, the math I'm kind of channeling here that I've known for the last 50 years, that's the unity. And Hegel's read of Aristotle, we now have one unity, one thing, manifesting itself in two separate ways at the same time. And that's why the subject of model theory, which again, I've been around for 50 years, how long I've been around, well, who knows, has really taken off, because mathematicians love to have more than one way to see the same thing. It's really helpful. But anyway, that's a side point, Okay, so what I said, there's exclusion principles going on the horizontal and on the diagonal. And so the possibilities, if you just think about it, what happens if you put a plus in a column? That plus immediately reverberates via the exclusion principles into excluding, creating a minus horizontally from it and creating a minus diagonally from it. And those two minus totally overshoot, and both of them produce the other plus in the column. So the minute you put a plus anywhere in the square, you got 2 pluses in whatever column that was, and 2 minuses in the other one. Here are the 2 possibilities. That's got to be the way it is. Oh, and by the way, I'm about to actually use the book, so if you want to see, here is Sal. Oops. See? Cute. But my point at the moment, in the middle of McCluskey's book, he devotes an entire 2-page spread to what I construe as what I'm talking about. So let me see what it's a 2-page spread. So let's see what happens if I try to show it to you. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's just too immense. You can't see anything here, right? You can just see Blueberry Hill, but it looks empty. Oh, that's because, let's try to focus a bit. Here we go. So it's so small, I'm not sure if you can make it out. But here, on this side of Blueberry Hill, there is Sal's mother. And as I said, the 2 kids get mixed up. There is Little Bear. Sal's mother is intent picking blueberries, and she just hears there's a kid behind her, doing what kids do. And so she hasn't noticed yet. Notice we are now being shown, i.e. 2 pluses, Sal's mother and Little Bear. And the other 2 are just nowhere, right? They're hidden, aren't they? Well, let's move to the other side of Blueberry Hill. How far do I got to go here? Shoot, where are they? Oh, have they shown up yet? Yeah, I guess there they are. Ah! My tech support is kind of fancy here. Can we see it? Or is it? Oh, maybe it's too far down. Let me see. Oh, there they are. Anyway, let me try to point and see what happens. There is Little Bear's mother, and there is Sal. Can you? Oh, is that not visible? What's happening? Oh, I see. Yeah, they were so far away, I didn't actually go far enough. There is Little Bear's mother, and where's Sal? There's Sal, yeah. And there's Sal. And of course, by the exclusion principle, in order for them to be shown, the other pair, Sal's mother and Little Bear, they're hidden. Okay. So that's my best justification for, what I'm reading out of Blueberries for Sal. But so this was a quick thing about something that Hegel calls solicitation, but I think it's worth doing it more detail. So here's kind of a more maybe causal and cause and effect sense of doing it. Oh, I'm sorry. Shoot. Wait a minute. Really? This always happens in math talk. Sorry. I'm out of time. Shoot. Yeah. So let me finish this slide and then see what happens. So I want to go through a causal chain here, if I'm permitted time. Namely, suppose we just have the appearance of not even Sal, just the appearance of, say, some mechanical voice saying, human child. So somehow that side of the true infinity dichotomy has appeared. That by itself will solicit the appearance of, well, everything that should appear in this column, because there's now a plus in this column. And let's see how it works. The plus in this column, by the exclusion principle horizontally on the row, means there's a minus here. But the minus doesn't just mean, oh, well, there's no, the bear child is hidden. No. It goes right down to way in the depths of that hiddenness is Little Bear himself. And Little Bear posits and grounds Little Bear's mother. So there's not just a plus there, but, shoot, where am I? But, what? But what? Shoot, it worked better in practice. But Little Bear's mother herself, a particular appearance. This appearance is from a stage where she hasn't noticed yet that the kid behind her is not Little Bear. I guess the wind is blowing the wrong direction, so she can't smell who's behind her, and it just sounds like a kid eating blueberries. So Little Bear's mother is now there, and so since we got a plus in that box, the same reasoning applies. The exclusion principle on the row puts a minus where, well, way deep in the depths of that minus and the hiddenness is Sal's mother. And Sal's mother posits. And Sal's mother, who still hasn't noticed that Sal isn't the one behind her, is positing a certain presence, the appearance of Sal, and then voila, there's Sal. So just from human child, the net effect of what we're talking about causes a true, actual, in the moment appearance of little Bear's mother and Sal. And these two, in some ways, have solicited each other. And in some sense, that's solicitation. At least this mathematician's read of solicitation from Hegel. So sorry for going over. As I said in my title, and time permitting, back again, but I now have to consult with time, I suppose.
Maybe
quite
Leo.
This, by the way, is the way all math
Leo,
talk goes. We always
Leo,
over prepare. Sorry for going over.
Okay, have you finished? Or maybe one more minute?
Oh no, I mean we might as well just finish here. I didn't realize it would take as long as it did.
Okay, good. I mean, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, then Nick.
Okay, my internet is acting up a little bit, so I'm going to keep my video off. And I have a very short talk entitled In Defense of Transcendental Miserableism. Okay. So, in an attempt to overcome Hume's skepticism, Kant famously positioned the human mind as the center of his philosophic universe. No longer was the mind a simple tabula rasa or a blank slate looking out over the world and passively observing, but now it was an active contributor in how the world would be constituted to the human subject. Thus, the world would be divided between the world for us, or the phenomenal, and the world without us, or the noumenal. No access to the noumenal would be possible for the human subject. It can only be known via a negative. Through a simple negation of the phenomenal could the only thing about the noumenal be known, that it is wholly separate from the phenomenal. To this regard, I would like to point out an irony that arises from the Kantian picture of philosophy. The scientific picture of the world that it tries to save is revealed to be one that's dependent upon a human-centric understanding of philosophy. So, no longer is it possible to know the world apart from how it appears to us, but at the same time, the science which Kant hoped to save constantly brings forth facts that shows a universe without us. What are we to make of scientific facts like the Earth formed 4 billion years ago? Did a time before the human subject actually exist, or are these scientific facts merely a projection out from our human-centric philosophic paradigm? A projection that explains what the world would have looked like if a human was there to observe these happenings, but one that didn't literally happen, for time is a human category, and therefore talking of a time before humans is nonsensible. These are the questions that interest many more recent philosophers, the most recent being Quentin Meillassoux and Nick Land. How do we think a world without us when all thought binds the world to us? For Meillassoux, what could be said of the world without us is that it could be different from the way we experience it, leading him to postulate that this world could be a hyper chaos, where the categories of causality, time, and space do not apply. So that's Meillassoux, but me being the token sort of Nick Land expert on this course, I'm more interested in how Land answered this question. And for Land, Kant is in many ways sort of the ultimate enemy. Kant is this ultimate rule maker and moralizer, constantly creating limits that we dare not transcend. For Land, this obsession with rules and limits is a fit of panic. There's something radically dark and unsavory that Kant is trying to guard against. Now, what is this outside for Now, what this outside is, for my money, is the central question of Land's philosophy, and trying to make sense of it is outside of the scope of a simple talk like this. But as Land says, may coldness be my God. What this outside ultimately is an inhuman coldness. Land is keen on describing ontology as a Lovecraftian monster that's working itself through us. That's what Kant panicked in Fear against, the idea that the universe is indifferent to whatever moral laws or categories of knowledge we dress it up with, that all senses of human being become liquid in the face of coldness of the universe. And it's like, as Marx famously said, all that is solid melts into air, and like in the face of capital and whatnot. So now to end, I would just like to just really briefly address a criticism of Land, namely that he's edgy. And I think this is a criticism. Yes, it's like sort of meant as jest, but I think it packs a punch, because isn't it pretty banal to say that the universe is just indifferent to us, that everything is dark, cold, and uncaring, and that nihilism reigns and all that stuff? And I would like to say why I'm interested in Land's work is because Land sort of pushes this world without care to its most extreme. He pushes this nihilism to its extreme. It's a good counterpoint to sort of this very sort of human-centric society that we live in. So, and this brings me to the title of my talk, which is sort of in defense of transcendental miserableism, because I feel like what Land challenges us to do is not to become miserable within sort of this picture of the universe that he brings forth with us. Land famously describes the universe as sort of this cold, uncaring, mechanistic machine. But ultimately, I don't think that that's what the universe is. I believe the universe has human care in it. There are human observers, there are human subjects, and ultimately we are one of those things, and that we have to face up to the human problems that brings forth. So I say that I would rather embrace sort of the transcendental miserableism that Land warns against. I would rather be miserable but human and caring for other humans than embracing sort of this death, this making it with death and nihilism that Land brings forth. So yes, that's my very brief talk.
Very good, thank you, Nick. I think also, one could say, even if the universe is indifferent to us, we're obviously not indifferent to the universe or to the world or to others. Point one. Point two, I actually don't think that even if Land here tries to be non-human centric, it's still human centric to say the universe is indifferent to us. It's almost like an adolescent call for daddy to please consider me, but don't be indifferent to me. And yeah, it's strange with Land because he just tries so much to get rid of the human, but I wonder if that's possible. But I think you pointed to some really important questions which are worthy to pursue, which is how to articulate experience, etc., that is not human centric. But ultimately, that's the human centricism is modern, isn't it? The Greeks certainly didn't have the human being at the center. So it's perhaps with someone like Heidegger that there's a escape route. So thank you, Nick. Anyone has a question on anything so far? Because now we have okay, if there are no questions, then I think Baris and Wes and Taylor and anyone else who wants to say something who didn't submit an abstract? Okay, so Baris and Stefan. Okay.
Well, my title is Philosophy a Discovery or Creation? I wanted to speculate on that. And my epigraph reads as, all great thinkers think the same, yet the same is so essential and so rich that no single thinker exhausts it. It's from Heidegger. So this was inspired by in a breakout room conversation. It was a short going back and forth between me and Albert. I don't remember the details well, but it kind of inspired later for me to think about this. And Albert likened the philosophy as mapping mind to concepts. And this was something that I was thinking about before, in which I thought whenever I face with a text, it never is easy for me. It feels as if, like, when I read a philosophical work, it always gives me this feeling that I'm just walking in an alien land, and it's just I have to kind of try to recognize this land, and it's hard. It's a daunting process, as we all know, I guess. And I had to circle around this conversation. It just stayed with me. And I felt like I need to clarify this. And I realized that it vaguely resembled this idea that I read in another book, in which the author was arguing about Nietzsche's enigmatic proposal that it's a juxtaposition of his ideas, that whether one creates self or whether one discovers self. So some similar kind of vague, thoughts came to my mind after thinking about this book and that short conversation with Albert in the breakout room. Then it came to thinking about Hegel's shorter logic. In the beginning of the shorter logic, being is the first category, and that's where thinking starts with. And being is associated with immediacy. It's sort of like intuition. There's no thinking quite yet. There's no determination yet. And negation of being brings nothing. And then both being and nothing are immediate. And Hegel here, there enigmatically kind of proposes those two things, being and nothing, are the same yet different. It's as if, like, one needs to kind of take just the word meanings or, but other than that, everything is same about them, yet we cannot really make them same either. And then those being and nothing vanishes into each other, and Hegel brings the becoming as category here. This vanishing stayed with me as well. This sort of, whenever I see this kind of structures where I cannot grasp, I just remember this word vanishing. It's as if, like, that's the kind of nature of thinking. That's the nature of kind of being in a way. So Hegel starts from these immediates, and as I said, we can maybe call this intuition as well. And through his presuppositionalist thinking, he elevates these categories from the previous categories, and he's sort of seemingly, I have this kind of vague feeling, not articulated well enough, that it creates a kind of an ontological view of the reality which we live in, which we act. It's not just thought that he is describing. It's sort of like what kind of a world we are operating is sort of described in logic as well. He in Hegel's thinking, forward resolve. He resolves the conflict moving forward and elevates thought. And in one of the philosophers that I follow, Robert Wallace, he puts his dialectics as abstract, negation, and concrete. In terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, he proposes the right way to think about is abstract, negation, and concrete. And until we come to a concrete category, and then until that concrete category becomes unstable, we stay there. And then if need be, if there's instability, we move forward. We need to create another category out of that. So coming back to my kind of experience with the philosophical texts, I realized later that in some cases, if one reads a philosophical text deeply, there are moments in which the text helps one to understand about one's own thinking. These are the moments in which the text is interacting with you, interacting with the oneself. And in those moments, that feeling of alienness that I talked about before disappears. And yet, because the text is still talking about something really still unfamiliar, you still have that vague feeling about, you're not quite certain yet. There's no certainty still. You're in a land between familiarity and unfamiliarity, sort of. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of sketch certain ideas and bring back the topic really. So this is how I want to think about creation or discovery in a way. I think these two terms, discovery and creation of philosophy, should be understood in this fashion. We can't quite call philosophy discovery nor creation. It's somewhere in between. And I liken this when I was writing this. It also reminded me of the way we interact with literature. Also, a literary piece works on mind in a similar fashion. Through literary devices, the literary text reminds one that ordinary feeling of oneself, and through the same devices, that ordinary feeling becomes alien to you. You somewhat see that feeling or sense in a different fashion. It's sort of, it's a refreshed emotion. It's a refreshed sense going forward with you interacting with the literary text. So I think it is fair to say that what Hegel describes in his Logic is one way of looking at how thought is formed, referring to Heidegger's, epigraph there. At the end of the day, all great philosophers tell us about the same thing, but we are still dazzled at the end of the day by how they tell about that reality. And but I think Hegel, even after 200 years, still is. I find it very refreshing for myself, and I could still think Hegel as a good guide while walking in life. This is all.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear that the very good talk, but also good to hear that the breakout sessions give rise to something like this, reassuring, because I never know what's going on in there, which is good. That's what it should be like. Speaking of societies of control, etc. But I would also recommend, so, as you and Elba, this apparently was ignited between you. This is what, of course, best case should happen. I can also see perhaps some parallels to Tonatiuth's project of thinking and forgetting, learning and forgetting, with the what you call the vanishing as the nature of thinking or being. So perhaps take that up somehow. And yes, send these pieces to each other, etc., and keep writing. So we have Taylor with some spontaneous thoughts, and then Stefan with a poem.
Yes. So I don't have a formal seminar prepared. More just a brief reflection. This was my third course with Johannes, and definitely the most difficult. Our journey of study started with 20th century thinkers, and then we went back in time to the early Greeks, and now to the German idealists. And throughout this course of study, my mental model of philosophy, I think, has evolved from kind of like a disparate collection of interesting ideas or theories to what's more of a project, like a fundamental grounding. So grounding knowledge, perception, being, and so on. The word grounding might typically imply some kind of stability, but in my experience here, that is often not the case, especially when we're talking about perception coming with presuppositions or freedoms linked to necessity and so on. I was particularly affected by our discussions around Scholé, which I think falls into the realm of grounding if we understand it as a notion of sufficiency. I should add, a week from today, I'm getting married. So a lot of my learning has kind of been filtered through the mindset of love and partnering, and I've found some way to connect the dots where they might not be there. But I've taken this idea of Scholé as a necessary precursor to, I think, experiencing love, to experiencing it on an ontological level, but also a very practical one too. In the Jewish and Kabbalistic tradition, love and marriage, they are philosophical pursuits. So by virtue of that, they kind of need to be in Scholé. The Jewish perspective recognizes love as tied to like a primal memory of oneness, and how this primal memory has to confront otherness and difference with how we live now. Consequently, the Kabbalah speaks of marriage as like the union of these primordial forces that are pervasive in everything. We can contrast this idea of love with a very functional concept of it, that's more prevalent today, where it's kind of this amalgamation of all the right data points between two people. And it's very easy to imagine this in the world of online dating, where we're all flattened into data, and oftentimes we falsely identify with this data. You could picture two people out on a date where each of them is actually having dinner with the other person's profile, the representation of the other, and this like weird feedback loop between the simulacra. In my mind, that's not love. And to speak of sufficiency literally, I'm sure there's always going to be someone with rounder curves or sharper features. We're not talking about browsing Netflix. And I think, it's evident that there isn't a grounding in, a lot of relationships. I'll end with a thought from the last lecture. To be frank, I'm still not totally clear on what Hegel was on about. But Johannes said something really interesting during that lecture that I've been considering in this context. He mentioned the notion of limit, this Greek idea of limit and its role in making determinations. I thought this was a very powerful way, perhaps the ultimate way to ground a marriage at the core of its till death do us part. Like, this is the ultimate limit. You know, my wife will, she will leave the world by my side, or I will by hers. It's like emotional to even think about it that way. But I think it's just the most powerful way to understand marriage. And, you know, how's that for sufficiency? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Taylor. Very poetical and wonderful that you bring scolaire and love into dialogue, because that's what they are. Without this measure of sufficiency, this grounding, there can be no love.
Don't worry, Johannes. We haven't booked a romantic getaway in the Rhine.
Yeah, but you've booked the all-round perfect wedding package, I hope. Satisfaction
Yes,
guaranteed. Good. There is also in German Glauben, to believe. It is connected to loben, which means to praise, but also to love, to lieben. And so to say that I believe in you also means to say that I love you. And it is in the act of saying that you believe in someone, believe in love, I would suppose it's also in English etymologically related. That's what provides or gives a grounding to someone, doesn't it? And because to love someone and to say that I believe in you lets the other know that he or she's good enough. There's enough. So thank you very much, Taylor. I think we'll finish it. So this was preempting the poetic endnote, which Stefan has the honor to deliver us with. And the floor is yours, Stefan. Your poem.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my day has been it's been a big how to say, yeah, I felt a bit rushed coming back to this space, and I thought I'd just say thank you first of all for actually creating this space and this journey for all of us. It's been a joy, and I've really picked up on some really good content and thought, and I really respect also all the technicalities that have passed, because I realize I'm way too much of a poet to actually understand the majority of what's has been discussed, but I think I have an intuition. And before I start the poem, which I actually finished this morning, it's an ongoing poem which I've been working on for months, and I started it actually before this course, and it's called Galactic Foam. And I want to paste a link here of the one of the reasons why I started this, why I joined this course. So it's what is emerging, and Thomas Björkman being interviewed by David Fuller by Rebel Wisdom. And there's an interesting piece about how German idealism actually was foundational for the current state of the Scandinavian societies, opposed to the Anglo-Saxon world. There's an interesting take, and there's links to interesting thinkers too. So yeah, I'm very much I busy myself with what's emerging right now. So thanks. I invite you to have a look if you have the time, and I'll start reading my poem now. It'll be the first time I read it, so bear with me. I'm gonna try and catch the flow. Let me put some juice in my laptop. Yeah, it's been a bit of a chaotic day. Anyway, so here we go. I'm gonna switch to my Word file. Galactic foam, burst your bubble, bubbles, yes, bursted your bubble into pure being, no thing inside, just emptiness, embraced, and I am that I feel, I do, I love, I talk, I see, I understand to be empty, full of space. The void said, let me take you by the hand and guide you into the self-organizing no thing. That is right, at the center of you, not understanding this. So let's see what your ego has to say about this. Right, left, or center, empty within. And so said the I, regressively drawn aback, transfiguring with respect to our Irish friend, gone too soon, stolen. A reflection in the mirror, gazing, I gaze crystal clear. With inevitable focus, I see, focusing, repositing mine. I and I, even triple I, now I see you, cross-eyed, flipping the script. I salute you, dear John O'Donoghue, John O'D, in the mirror, the lake flat, untouched. Oh, dearie me, why is it? The I and I constantly repositioned, masculine to the feminine. Why did she do it? Cry, only to see his shadow cast in her wake. The lake, flat, crystal clear, dark, the nothingness, beneath, underneath, the heath, hidden, waiting to become a logical event in text, letters, symbols. Oh, my dear friend, yes, I have forgiven. There is no sense in forgiveness, for a nihilist grieves not, whilst I nevertheless embrace you in this age of nothingness. Have I died a pubic suicide? My life force gone, oh ye of little faith, for what is death? Than merely a new beginning, and nevertheless I wonder who can make sense of this. At the back, again, gazing in the mirror, in the room, cast in the mirror's reflection, can you see the back of it? The eye and the back of his head? No face? For sure, you nincompoop, hoop-de-hoop, my face unseen. Are you and I really afraid of this framing? Are you truly afraid to lose face, to stay unreflected and neglected by the light? Who is you anyway, and why should I care? Come on, you whining pussy, where's your flair? You waneth, oh, you waneth, you waneth. Where shall we make this point? The dot on the eye of the idea. Logic eludes me now. Are you for real, or are you to resemble a hole in my whistle? Or the opening of the horn blowing for the season to hunt will not befall us just yet. And why does this nevertheless cast a shadow? For you, with the light bouncing of the back of your skull, breaking the framing of your mind's eye, and you'll be able to see in the mirror of mirrors again, still the lake's surface, crystal clear, with, as always, the eye pose it, the I and I. Yes, the I and I, in order to find the one of a kind. The wind down. Now, please calm down. Now, down playing. Through this window of the self-positing I, you see in your mind's eye the reflection of a breeze playing with the curtain. As you light up the place by flipping the switch, only to hear the soft vibrations. A classical symphony of Satie's Lent, time and space bent. All 48 dimensions incorrect, but not it there with no thing, unreflected the light. For now, let me be the image undetected, the sound of infinity yet for you to be seen. All that is in between naught So by the by, you ask not why. The door and you spontaneously opened with understanding, sight, speech, love, action, feeling, and being. All of you rushing in to see what is happening in this space bubbling up in a primordial soup, reflected not too dense, too thick, thickness of brain, thickness of gray matter, no light, all but taught not. So what? So that we may tat sat at the campfire, doing the being together with my reflection and I, the stories of old unfold you. By folding my hands, wishing the sun to rise again, the star, one of the many for us all in the morning, shining, sparkling rays, yet untold, spiraling up to the deepest of the dark, absolute stillness, the stark, dark vacuum. Zero. Who is your hero? It is the I that releases my reality of infinite flux, twisting, perpetual motion in nature's flow. By the ways that you know, as above, as below, the gold chain stretches you into a state without a church, chapel, temple, shrine. Just the reflection altered of you into pure consciousness, sitting bodiless, it's not mine. Mr. Spiral, spiraling down the steps at my parents' place. Why are you holding onto your face? See differently the emptiness and avoid yourself from falling down the rabbit hole you plummet. Where is the summit? Close on the scope, chasing galactic spirals and cosmic whirlpools in honor of Hubble, where he was so understandably drawn to the event horizon, sucking you straight back, televising the image of you looking into the mirror of deep space, at home, floating inside. And if only one could see the colors on the outside of your own little bubble burst. Yes, burst, I be burst, burst bubbles, your bubble free, that I and I just cry. Cry it out, get out, set yourself free. Burst your bubble, I am, that I am, that I am, I for I, that I feel, I do, I talk, I see. Finally, that I understand altogether to simply be. Bubbling up primordially, all at once in a state of love. Continuously burst your bubble, burst. Set yourself free. Posit your I and I perpetually. C'est la vie. That's it.
Excellent. Very good. This is taking a journey through the entire course. And already pushing, I would say, almost into Heidegger. And it just shows again that the thinker needs the poet. Thank you very much. It's fantastic. I'd like to read it at some point, please. Yeah, extremely well done. Any questions, remarks, thoughts on anything? Every exhausted being again. Okay.
One comment, yeah. Just because it was mentioned a few times between Nick and Samuel, and just because I just read this essay by Heinrich Heine, and in multiple times in the text he calls Kant a terrorist. He literally uses that word. So Kant is this dark figure, has some precedent.
Yeah, I quite frankly, I can't understand how he existed. I'm kind of not over it yet.
I just wanted to say that I found this course the most difficult of the ones that we've done, and I think that's a really good thing, because it seems like intellectual heavy lifting to me. So whereas, you know, I may have only moved 1 iota of a percent towards understanding German idealism, it's made things, you know, when I try reading something else, it seems easy to understand because This is enjoyably difficult. Yeah.
So you keep carrying, you keep lifting 100 pounds 15 times a day. You can carry Russell easily, or even Nietzsche. But you will see, for example, when you go back now, for example, to the Nietzsche course, or even just some of the introductory chapters to Beyond Good and Evil and Nietzsche, how much there is in there of his critique of Kant and Schelling and the German idealists in general. He wasn't maybe, as Heidegger says, where the Nietzsche unfortunately never lingered enough for long enough in the cathedrals of Hegel's and Kant's thought. That might be fair enough, but still, I think Nietzsche does see something, and you will be able to see it more clearly. But then also something that Taylor pointed out, which is, philosophy isn't just a random collection of absurd theories. There's a necessary development, even now, to the more or less epigonal renaissances of, say, a new realism or so. That tells us something about philosophy also. But I also think it is possible to offer courses that are difficult. It's not about making it explicit or having any, as you know, I don't know if you've followed my rants, but what destroys philosophy academically is learning outcomes, is the guaranteed satisfaction of the student. I've succeeded when you walk away completely dislodged, dislocated, confused. Then that's my job is done. If you actually did, Samuel, maybe I heard you wrong, but Samuel, I think you said in the beginning that you had many a sleepless night. Did I hear that, or did I make that up?
Yeah, still dealing with that. Yeah.
So, because frankly, I mean, especially with the Nietzsche course, I was unable to sleep until 3-4 a.m. and the same for the early Greeks course. That was extremely intense. And for this one, I've tried to balance myself a bit more. But it does, it's just when you think back to the beginning of the science of logic, you have to completely suspend with everything and anything you ever thought was true. That's if I always say, if anything you can learn from Hegel. Philip gonna hate me for that. But that's it. Just what happens if this, of course, but you can also see not just themes or topics or so, but there's something that keeps coming back in terms of questions, which we seem to have forgotten. And I say that academic philosophy loses its senses when it no longer has an access to the capacity to deliver and deliver over what keeps it all together, which you can call the question of being, which you can call the question of the Henkai Pan. But yeah, so I'll maybe rant on a bit later. But Lew, you have a question, a hand, a finger. The hand and finger rule. Yeah, go ahead.
Just because you mentioned the new realism, so looking at the history of this stuff, the British idealists, the first couple of them, they are so bored. Literally, this is the language they use. They are so bored by John Stuart Mill and empiricism that they're like, let's study this German stuff. It seems more exciting. And then, 50, 60 years later, Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore say the exact same thing. Like, this idealism stuff is so boring. Like, let's study the empiricist stuff again. And you mentioned new realism. Check this out. This is a book I got. I don't know if you can read it, but it's American New Realism, 1910 to 1920. This is another totally forgotten movement that inspired in response to idealism, and they call themselves the New Realists. So New Realism is very old. These cycles keep happening.
Yeah. New Realism is very old. Don't tell some of the main figures. But I've heard little birds sing that you don't get funding anymore for it. So it has come to an end. That's another thing with philosophy. Never follow a trend if you want to persist in it. I think that's true for anything in life. For anything, in any profession, I would think. If you want to excel at whatever it is that you're doing. Rather ask for the presuppositions of the trend, perhaps. Philipp, Herr Niklas. Ja, bitte.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for your discussions and your talks, and for all the contributions you've done throughout the course. I've found it really enjoyable, interesting, and I feel like I've grown a lot from it. I also want to make particular comment to Leo's talk. I found it interesting how you managed to weave so many categories from the science of logic into just like a very brief talk. But anyway, great stuff, people. I really enjoyed this, and I hope I get to see you all more in the future and continue this development.